Chapter 31. Talc 1. Vienna, Austria. My bow glided across the strings of my violin, and my music bewitched the audience. How old is he? I heard he's only 8. 8 years old, and he's performing Niccolò Paganini's 24 Caprices at Grosse Musikvereinsaal as the opening act. A lavishly dressed aristocrat gasped. This child is a genius. He's more of a prodigy than Joshua Bell. What is his name? Kang Ho. He's the grandson of the current head of the Kang family, which is one half of Kang Mung, a rather large conglomerate from South Korea, milady. He's the child that has been hailed as a once-in-a-millennia genius. He was even in the paper you read this morning. The aristocrat's eyes widened. So that's Kang Ho, the child that has been shocking the world with his intelligence. I heard he was young, but I didn't realize he was this young, she exclaimed. Her jade eyes sparkled excitedly. There's nothing he can't do, her companion whispered to her. He has an almost perfect eidetic memory. His comprehension skills are amazing. He has won various international awards in various categories, far exceeding veterans who are much older than him. He even speaks 10 languages fluently. 10, my goodness. You think that's shocking. Apparently he was able to speak eloquently by the age of 10 months. His brain is more developed than others. I don't know the specifics, but over the years hundreds of esteemed scientists have visited South Korea just to get a chance to examine him. He has bewitched the world. The aristocrat's companion pointed towards the front row. Do you see that Asian man sitting between Lord and Lady Blackwood? That's Kang Seung, the child's grandfather. He's been using the boy's talents and influence to greatly extend his network. The Kangmung group, while powerful in terms of business, never had a big political foothold in the West, but through that child they've firmly established themselves and made significant connections. That child is a golden ticket. The aristocrat fanned herself. It's not surprising that everyone is quickly trying to become close with the Kangmung group. I'm also fascinated by that child. Not only is he a genius, just look at him. The aristocrat peered through her golden miniature binoculars. He has an otherworldly countenance. He looks like a walking angel, so pure, soft, and holy. Yet his eyes, they carry something somber, sinister, and alluring. Such a beautiful child. You're right. He'll grow up to break many hearts, that's for sure. And with how intelligent, well-mannered, and cunning he is, it's obvious to all that he'll accomplish grand things. Maybe I should set him up with Anastasia. Her companion's curled moustache twitched with shock. You can't be serious, my lady. No matter how talented and intelligent he is, he's not nobility, and he's from the... Hush, she whispered seductively into the man's ear. This could be the new hope for our declining family. We need to put pride on the back burner. They're both of the same age, and even if he's not of blue blood, he's still from a powerful family, with a long and pure dynasty and bloodline. The Kang family now have several diplomatic ties with prominent people that we want to do business with. This boy is our gateway. She smiled prettily. When the performance ends, be sure to send out a formal invitation so we can introduce the children to each other. The man simply nodded subserviently. I will be sure to do so. I was unaware of the conversation happening in the audience as I played. All I could think of was the music. Contrary to what these people believed, I was no musical genius. In fact, in my previous life, music was the one thing I struggled with the most. Music was like martial arts or sports. It was a skill that needed to be trained and honed over time. Although my impressive memory gave me an advantage, it didn't remove the challenge. Perhaps it's the struggle that makes me love music the most out of all my hobbies, well, aside from killing. I had spent most of my life, decades, playing the violin, yet I never had the chance to perform until this new life. Being paraded around the world by Kang Seung to show off my skills was very much for diplomacy and business, but I enjoyed every part of it. Especially this moment, being able to play in front of these insects and make them dance to my tune. I enjoyed every part of it. I came to the end of my piece, the lights dimmed, and I bowed before the large concert hall. Within seconds, the silence of the onlookers transformed into loud claps and standing ovations. Some roses were thrown at the stage as I left, and I smiled brightly as I waved goodbye. There was a great unexplainable power that came from being loved and fawned over by so many people. You did so well, Kang Ho. A crowd of musicians from the orchestra that was the main act of the night's concert came running up to me. How are we going to surpass your amazing performance, Kang Ho? Du hast es so gut gemacht. There were so many of them that I couldn't tell who was speaking to me. Dankeschön. I thanked them all. I'm glad you all liked it. I was really nervous. I spoke in English. I'm sure you will easily do better than me. I can't wait to see you all perform. I've been looking forward to it all night. I smiled nervously. That small comment won their hearts quickly. I was caught up in a whirlwind of praise and noise, but then a tall shadow appeared before me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have to prepare for your performance. I suggest you let my young master rest. Min-ho said this with a smile, but there was a pressure in his voice and a firmness in the way he stood that made everyone obey him. In a matter of seconds, it was just Min-ho and me in the corridor. He picked me up easily. You did well, young master. Another stunning performance. Those elitist vultures watched you like you were some trophy, and of course Kang Sung used you per usual as his ticket into exclusive events. Min-ho said this with a monotonous, unemotional tone, but his eyes gleamed red with madness. It would be so great if we could get rid of them all, wouldn't it? I said playfully. My mongrel nodded. I want to slaughter all those that treat you like some object, especially Kang Sung. I laughed loudly, but then my expression turned cold. Well, that's no good. You're supposed to protect me and only kill those I tell you to kill. Your wants and desires should be what I want and desire, right? Min-ho panicked and quickly reassured me. Of course, all I want is to be there for you. I'll only kill who you want. All I want is what you want, young master. I wouldn't dare act on those impulses unless you wanted me to. I watched him beg until he was near tears, and then I cracked a smile and patted him on the head. That's good, because you're all I have, Min-ho. You're all I have too, young master. Good, good. Now, did you do what I told you to do? Min-ho nodded. Once we entered my dressing room, he gently placed me on the sofa as he brought out his phone. Once Cha-hun-ha was released from prison, I had my people pick her up and take her to our play area. They did what was instructed. Show me. Min-ho handed me his phone. Playing on the screen was live footage from my play area. In a large container was Cha-hun-ha. She was restrained and held up by a lever, and she was buried up to her neck in talcum powder. She cried, tears streaming down her face as she begged, "Please, I don't know who you are or what I've done to you, but please, please let me go." A wide grin spread over my face, and I spoke into the phone. My voice came out through the speakers in the play area with a filter that made me sound like Jigsaw. In order to survive, you must follow my rules. The first rule, eat all the powder. Swallow every last bit of it, and you will see another day. Reminder, Cha-hun-ha was the maid that smacked Kang Ho in Chapter 5 and was arrested in Chapter 10. Chapter 32. Talc 2. Please, I can't eat this. I don't know what I did wrong. I don't know who you are, but please... Her begging was abruptly cut off as the lever turned, and the crane-like mechanism that she was tied to dropped her into the talc. She was pushed deep into the layers of white powder. While the powder looked light, there was a lot of it. The powder was in a tub that was the length and depth of a large industrial shipping container. It was about 20 ft, and we had filled with more than 23,000 kilograms worth of talc. The pressure from the overall weight of the powder was likely squeezing her bones and crushing her chest. The talc had a way of blocking the airways as well, so every little snort she made or gasp for breath filled her lungs with the dust-like particles. Her saliva would turn the talc into a paste in her mouth that would only further clog up her lungs. Every time she swallowed, it fell into her stomach. It was likely a very uncomfortable experience. I couldn't help but let out a childish snigger. A year ago, I had given Min-ho a portion of my allowance to develop a fun app for me. The mobile app had a variety of functions. It not only allowed me to see live CCTV footage from my playroom, but it also acted as a remote control, allowing me to use the torture devices in the room, even from a distance. It also had a voice-changing feature and a few more options. Money is a wondrous thing. It really does make dreams come true. As if I were playing a game, I pressed down on the button and kept Cha-hun-ha submerged for about 2 minutes. I didn't hold her down for too long. Brain damage starts to occur after 10 minutes of oxygen deprivation, and I didn't want her to be brain dead. I don't enjoy torturing an empty husk. I also had to take Chahuna's health into consideration. She was an older woman, overweight, and had high blood pressure, meaning she was the type that usually didn't last long with torture. She needed to be treated delicately, like the wings of a butterfly. If you touch butterfly wings directly, the oil from your fingers will start to dissolve the powder-like scales protecting them. One touch and the butterfly is vulnerable, weak, and only a step away from death. If you want to torture a butterfly, you need to be gentle with it and leave the wings to last. But let's not get into that. Butterfly wings aside, the point is, Hunha was fragile and needed to be destroyed with a tender and slow touch. I pulled her up. Her naked body was covered in powder, and she comically reminded me of a dip-dab lollipop covered in sherbet. For a moment she was unresponsive, but then she began spluttering. White talc burst from her nose and her mouth. She threw up and coughed, causing the dusty talc to arise around her in a cloud of white powder. It was dustier than the smacking of 2 chalkboard erasers. "Either you eat or you die," I said through the speaker. "The only response I should hear from you is yes. If I hear anything else, I will assume you've chosen death." Hunha coughed, and I teasingly inched her lower again towards the talc, and then she began to scream, squawking like some seagull. "Yes! Yes! Yes!" I giggled and heard some soft chuckles behind me. Min-ho was watching from over my shoulder with a malicious gleam in his eyes. "Good. Now eat all the talc. I will give you 1 week. If it is all still there by the time I next check in with you, then—" I didn't finish my sentence. I didn't need to. The threat was clear. "Why give her a week?" Min-ho interrupted. "Just make it a day and bury her in it when she fails. She clearly won't be capable of—" His sentence trailed off, and he shut his mouth obediently when he noticed the look I was giving him. I patted him on the head once he stopped. A mixture of praise and punishment was fundamental for his development. "As always, Min-ho, you're too impatient. There isn't any fun if we just kill her. Then what would be the point? Pain. Pain is the only way forward. You need to become more addicted to prolonging suffering." I purred gently as I continued to pat Min-ho's head. "Trust me, the greater the suffering before death, the bigger the release." "What kind of release?" I looked into Min-ho's eyes and I saw a slimmer of doubt, fear and admonition towards my words. Sometimes Min-ho had these moments of clarity. Every time I thought he had become similar to myself, he would break the illusion with that clarity. There was a part of him that was scared of me, of himself, of the things we did and discussed, a part of him I couldn't quite destroy, no matter how hard I tried. Especially in moments like this, when I let my childish persona slip, he would judge me with his clarity. He wasn't ready yet. In response to his gaze, small tears filled my eyes and slid down my cheeks. Did I say something wrong? I just thought that she should suffer because of the things she did to me. She hurt me. She was going to kill me, I cried and hugged Min-ho. She's evil, all the rest of them. A follower of those people that locked you in a cage. That's why she should suffer. I'm protecting you. With words like that, it was easy to twist Min-ho's loyalty back to me. His mind was fragile and he was wholly dependent on me. Just seeing my tears was enough to have him shaking. He hugged me back and said faithfully, "She needs to suffer. We need to prolong her suffering. We need to make her death fantastic." While my head rested on his shoulder, I grinned widely and did my best to suppress my laughter. Min-ho had a long way to go, but he wasn't too far from the goal. I couldn't wait to see the masterpiece that he would become. At that point, there was a knock on my dressing room door. One of the concert hall staff politely opened the door and smiled gently as she looked at me hugging Min-ho. He's very close with his butler, how cute, she thought. The main performance is underway on the stage, and your grandfather requested you come sit with him at the front row. I've come to fetch you and take you to your seat. I looked at the staff member and smiled politely. Okay. Inwardly, I was rolling my eyes. This could only mean that Kang Sung was going to use me as a means of small talk and bargaining again. How annoying. Chapter 33. A Proposal. 1. I pulled away from Min-ho, smiled at him gently, and then took the staff member's hand. "Stay here and continue playing my game for me," I instructed while batting my childlike eyes innocently. Minho nodded obediently. "Be safe and have a good time, young master." I waved goodbye, and then the staff member and I left the room. "What game have you been playing?" she asked innocently. "Pac-Man." "Oh, that's a rather old game. Do you like the old stuff?" I grinned brightly. "Yep, I love Pac-Man. I especially like the way he devours all his enemies. I also like eating people. Num, 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 num." I gnashed my teeth and made exaggerated eating movements like a shark. The staff member laughed out loud. "Oh, you are so cute," she squealed. "I'm not supposed to do these types of things, but—" She gingerly took out her phone. "Can we please take a picture together?" She twiddled her thumbs nervously, and I smiled cutely. "Of course." We took a few selfies, and in a few I mockingly bit at her arm. Her skin was rather soft and bouncy. Her muscles were weak. It didn't seem like she worked out much, and she was skinny. I didn't even have to sink my teeth in to feel her bones. She didn't seem to be the type to make an appetizing meal at all. I wasn't even slightly hungry for her. There was no point learning her name or remembering her for a later date. After the selfies, I obediently went with her to the seats in the large auditorium. The music boomed loudly the moment we came out of a backstage door. The orchestra, the Vienna Philharmonic, was playing a rousing rendition of Johann Strauss's classics. The orchestra was being conducted by Seiji Ozawa. The sound was simply magical. In my past life, I'd only ever listened to the broadcasts of their live performances on the radio, but now I was listening to them live. It truly was a different experience. Hearing an orchestra in person truly lifted the soul. The vibrations through the floor, the playing of the instruments being so fresh in my ears, and the enjoyment of the rest of the crowd. This was amazing. I almost regretted not coming out earlier to listen to the start of their performance, but then I remembered the sounds of Hunha screaming, and that regret disappeared. That had also been quite a moving piece of music. The staff member quietly led me to my seat in the front row. It was a seat to the left of a rather wealthy-looking woman. Kang Seung was seated between this woman and a man. I had no other choice but to sit at the seat by her side. As I sat down, the rich woman kindly greeted me, her eyes smiling like crescent moons. I mirrored her smile and didn't say a word as I sat back and enjoyed the performance. The Vienna Philharmonic played for another hour and a half. Everything they did was magical. I simply closed my eyes and enjoyed the ride. My feet tapped and I wanted to dance. Interestingly enough, I found myself missing Melody. When we first met, we used to dance. At that time, she wasn't scared of me. I had yet to reveal my true self to her. We would listen to classical music, particularly works by Johann Strauss, and we would glide across the room in each other's arms, just giving ourselves away to the tunes around us. We never danced like that again after I started torturing her. I did try, but by that point she was too nervous, jittery, and accident-prone to dance properly. I'd also broken the bones in her feet with a hammer, and because of that, she developed a limp that made dancing even harder. I guess if I had one regret towards her, it would be hurting her feet. She had really been such a talented dancer. Funny how music brings out thoughts and memories. But then again, when you spend decades with an individual, it's hard to forget them. I wondered what she did after I died. Did Melody cry? Just the thought of her crying was ludicrous, and I knew it. No, she likely danced with joy and shouted with happiness. Although there was a time when she really loved me. That time had disappeared long ago. She had probably taken the car and gone to the police station straight away. It was likely that my legacy was being unpacked by the police. Well, they wouldn't find much. I never kept any of my victims' belongings. Their flesh was food and their bones incinerated and scattered. Just thinking about the struggles the police were likely facing in my old world made me smile. It was a shame I couldn't see it. The orchestra eventually came to their final piece, Johann Strauss the Radetzky March, Op. 228. It was beautiful. Music had a way of evoking emotion in me that most things could not. It had a way of filling my heart and taming me. When there was music, the violent side of me always slumbered until the music stopped. Everyone rose to their feet and applauded. The claps were so loud that I felt my ears ring, and I nearly lost my balance because of how much the floor trembled. The orchestra had said they had been worried about surpassing my performance, but they had done so easily. They had most definitely bewitched everyone in the room. Once the cheers and congratulations had been given and the musicians left the stage, soft chatter began and people began to talk as the lights brightened and champagne was being handed out. Some people left, but for the most part, the rich and elite lingered to network. Kang Seung gestured to me to come towards him. I inched closer to my grandfather and politely greeted the wealthy woman and man beside him. The lady wore a long black boudoir dress made of chiffon, satin and tulle. She had a tall neck and perfect posture with high cheekbones and clear eyes. She reminded me of a swan. She had likely been a beauty in her youth. She was still a beauty now, but the wrinkles around her eyes and the thin skin of her hands showed that time hadn't forgotten her. Her husband, on the other hand, was repulsive. He was a ball of fat, bald and greasy. The tailored suit he wore couldn't contain the barrel bulge of his stomach, and his collar barely stood up around the mass of flesh that was his neck. This is Lady and Lord Blackwood. The lady is the chairman of this performance hall, and the couple are the founders of the Angkor Society, a network of the richest and most elite families on this side of the hemisphere. They both come from a long legacy of Danish royalty and nobility, Kang Seung explained. To put it plainly, these were people born into money and power that knew more people born into money and power. People that Kang Seung wanted to know and work with for his agenda of raising the status of the Kangmung group in the West. Kang Seung wanted Kangmung to be more than a successful conglomerate. From a long lineage of merchants, he wanted the group to be sovereign. A group made inviolable by its power and connections, and not just by its money. I understood his goals, but I honestly found it pointless. In my opinion, kissing up to rich blue bloods and nobility was out of fashion. The monarchy in this world was like my old one. It was becoming more obsolete with time. In this modern era, groups like Kangmung were more valuable and important to the masses than these people would ever be. Yet he clung to this old notion of power. While I thought all this, I extended my hand out politely and shook theirs. "It's a pleasure to meet you, the Lord and Lady Blackwood. I hope you enjoyed my performance and that you've had an amazing evening." Hearing my eloquent native English from my 8-year-old lips, the old pair smiled brighter. "Oh my," said Lord Blackwood, "you are such a delight." While Lady Blackwood gazed at me innocently and sweetly, I noticed a leering look in Lord Blackwood's eyes. It was somewhat hazy and perverse. I knew that type of look. I had seen it often in the eyes of Father Johnson. In that second, I felt rage build in my veins. I had the urge to slam Lord Blackwood's head against his chair and strangle his fat neck with the gold chain from his glasses. But I held myself back. I wouldn't do it now. I simply returned his gaze. Chapter 34. A Proposal 2. "I invite both of you to come around to our manor one of these days," Lord Blackwood stated to Kang Seung. "We host many banquets and balls, and I'm sure our guests would be thrilled to have the child there." Kang Seung's eyes lit up. This was exactly the type of invitation he wanted, he pleasantly agreed. "Of course, whenever you send the invitation, I and my grandson will be sure to be there. I also have many private parties at my gentleman's club." Lord Blackwood looked at me again with that lecherous gaze of his. "And I know he'll be a huge hit at those." Kang Seung seemed to be none the wiser to the true intentions behind Lord Blackwood's words. He continued to smile widely and nodded at the offer. But then again, knowing Kang Seung, he might have recognized the look and decided to ignore it. He may have been my grandfather, but he was a vindictive man, and I knew he saw his goals as more important than people. That's why we got along so well. He probably didn't care about the intentions of Lord Blackwood as long as he got what he wanted, which was connections. This thought was further confirmed when Lord Blackwood patted me on the shoulder. His large, sweaty hands gently stroked my face in a somewhat inappropriate manner. His wife seemed not to notice, and he laughed it off, but I noticed Kang Seung's expression change a bit. He continued to have a superficial smile, but there was a strange look in his eyes, and his hand had closed into a fist by his side, but he made no move to rebuke Lord Blackwood. He just watched. He watched just like nuns in the parish, as if he was pretending not to notice anything. At that moment, I felt, well, disappointed. Unconsciously over the last 8 years, I had put Kang Seung on a pedestal in my head, forgetting that he was a human, a selfish human like myself and like everyone else. It didn't make me hate Kang Seung, but I had expected more from him. I had expected him to be a person that didn't need to resort to actions like this for connections. I looked at Kang Seung, and he probably saw that disappointment in my eyes. I couldn't hide it. That's when he gently pulled me away from Lord Blackwood. "When you send your invitations, I'll definitely consider it," he smiled. "Now, it has been a long day, and I hope the Lord and Lady enjoy the rest of their evening. It is about time that I took Ho to bed." "Oh, of course." Lady Blackwood smiled softly. "Young children shouldn't be staying up so late. I wish you a good evening, Sir Seung." "You as well." After they had finished with the long goodbyes, Kang Seung carried me backstage. He strolled in the direction of the dressing room while greeting other VIP guests who were lingering around. Once we got to a more secluded stretch of the corridor, he paused. "That was wrong of me. I won't do that again," he said rather resolutely. I simply said, "Okay," and that was the end of that conversation. When we got back to the dressing room, Min-ho abruptly muted his mobile device and placed it back into his pocket. Kang Seung noticed this but didn't question it. He simply said, "Get ready to leave. Notify the driver and my secretary. We're going back to the hotel." Min-ho bowed deeply and didn't hesitate to rush out of the room and execute that order. Although he often told me how he hated Kang Seung and wanted to kill him, in reality, we all knew that they were empty threats. Min-ho deeply feared Seung. He had been his slave in the arena, and that fear of him remained. Once Min-ho left, Kang Seung put me on the sofa. He looked at me awkwardly as if he wanted to say something. There was a bit of silence, and then just as he opened his mouth, someone knocked on the door. "Who is it?" "Hello, Sir Seung. May I have a word with you? I am from the Romanov family, and we have a proposal for you." "Come in." I could see Seung's eyes light up with curiosity. The House of Romanov had been the reigning imperial house of Russia from 1613 to 1917. In my previous world, in 1918, the Bolshevik officials executed the last Tsar of Russia and his direct family. Of the House of Romanov's 65 members, only 47 survived and went into exile abroad. In 1924, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, the senior surviving male-line descendant of Alexander II of Russia, claimed the leadership of the defunct house. In this world, however, the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and his family had survived the assassination attempt. In 1918, they fled to Vienna and settled there. The fate of the family remained the same. They ended up keeping their royal titles, but that was all they had, titles. Even though the restoration of their dynasty was impossible, they remained princes and princesses and preserved the heritage of their kin. But they had no power and authority. They only had a large amount of wealth that was depleting with each generation. I had heard enough idle gossip to know that they were losing money fast these days due to a string of bad business investments. Perhaps that was why they wanted to talk with Kang Seung. The door opened, and there was a tall man standing there. He had a rather distinguished curled moustache and a rather handsome, youthful face. He was wearing a well-fitted Brioni Vanquish II suit. He smiled at me, and then firmly shook Kang Seung's hand. "It is a pleasure to meet you. I am Alexis, the husband of Grand Duchess Anna, the current head of our Romanov house. My lady extends her greetings. She very much enjoyed young Ho's performance. He truly is quite the child." Kang Seung's smile became larger, and all business. "Thank you. Ho does indeed have a bright future. Does your proposal include this bright future?" Alexis laughed. "You're quick to the point. Yes, indeed it does. My proposal could make his future even brighter." "Then take a seat, I am all ears." Seung smiled and gestured for Alexis to sit on the lavish red velvet seats. Once seated, Alexis helped himself to some water. He poured the cold liquid into a crystalline glass and heaped it with ice. He took his time sipping at the drink before he next spoke. "Being intelligent and so well connected as you are these days, I'm sure you know of the state of the Romanov household." We have been scammed by business partners and invested in faulty deals over the last few decades that have significantly depleted our wealth. When I married into the Romanov family, the situation was slightly better. I was a former prince of the Prussia family, and since we were in similar circumstances, we pooled our wealth together, but that didn't help. We want to restore our wealth, and we want to work closely with a good businessman such as yourself. Kang Seung hummed a bit. I could see the cogs in his mind churning. And what can you offer my family in return for collaborating with you? Sovereignty, status, a title. You're running around the social circles right now in hopes that it will raise your group and yourself to a higher level in society. The nobles are all aware of your intentions, and because you and your grandson are entertaining and unique, they're letting you kiss up to them and hang around in their spaces, but they'll never let you in. And you're going to give me a way in? Yes. Chapter 35. A Proposal. 3. How? Kang Seung leaned back in his chair, his fingers neatly crossed against the other in his lap. Alexis had caught his attention. Through the oldest tradition in the book, marriage, Alexis smiled at me warmly. My niece, Anastasia, is the same age as Kang Ho. Through an arranged marriage, we can show off the union between both our families. You will be able to take advantage of the Romanov name and elevate the Kangmung group further in high society without having to, mind my language, ass-kiss predators such as Lord Blackwood. While you benefit from our status, we can maintain our wealth through doing business with your group and continuing a long-standing relationship. We have a lot of profitable business ideas that just need an investor, good guidance, and a powerful force behind them. Alexis paused, gently sipped from his glass of water, and stared at Kang Seung. What do you think? Seung was silent for a bit. I could tell he was seriously considering Alexis's proposal. There were many benefits that this marriage could bring to the Kangmung group. While Kangmung was powerful and large with a long history, they had many competitors, and they were often looked down upon by those of old money and nobility, even in South Korea. Throughout their history, the Kangmung group had ongoing friction with royalty and elites that persisted into the modern day. Despite their pride as a group, they were often dismissed as merchants and businessmen and kept away from certain events. Kang Seung had personally experienced being snubbed by children of these elites in his youth. Because of that, Seung had always aspired to take the group beyond the level of a simple conglomerate. He wanted Kangmung to be a group that even politicians and the president would have to be polite towards, and it also fed into his own future goals of running for office. Yes, Kang Seung wanted to go into the world of politics once he retired. That was why he had pushed for Kang Jun-ki to marry Yong Myong. Her dragon group would have been his gateway into the world of politics and the elite. But of course that plan fell through after her accident. However, the Romanovs would literally make them royalty. Even if they had no kingdom, the world would be paying attention to their actions. With the Romanovs' history and legacy, just having their names attached to them would cause their status to skyrocket. It was everything Kang Seung had been aiming towards. No matter what type of business the Romanov family wanted to create, Seung was certain that his group could make it profitable. It was clearly a win-win situation without much loss. But he still carefully thought it over. He glanced at me. I had been sitting down quietly while swinging my short legs throughout this whole exchange. Kang Seung then did something that surprised both myself and Alexis. He asked for my opinion. What do you think, Ho? If you want to go ahead with this and become engaged with Anastasia, I will agree. If you don't want to, I will respect your opinion. It wasn't anything huge. He was simply asking what I thought on the matter, but I was moved. He could have easily overlooked me. My young face became thoughtful. I had changed so many things already that the current events had very much veered off the original storyline. There was no Princess Anastasia even mentioned in Overcoming Obstacles. But who cared about that? A new storyline, a new adventure, my own dark path not dictated by that pathetic writer. That's what I wanted. And if I thought about it, this could be very fun. This would be an engagement that neither of us would be able to break off easily, meaning they were freely giving me a toy that would be mine for a lifetime. I had never played with a princess before. I wondered if they screamed differently from other people. I smiled and finally spoke up. I want to go forward with it. I would love to be engaged to a princess. It's like something from a fairy tale granddad. I looked at Alexis with wide, innocent eyes. I promise to be her knight in shining armor. I'll be loyal to her forever and make her mine. Alexis instantly grinned with pleasure once he heard those words. My goodness, your grandson really is too precious. While Alexis laughed, Kang Sung gave me a strange glance as if he could see my true twisted intentions. The corners of his lips twitched upwards, and then he shook hands with Alexis. Then we have ourselves a deal. William! Kang Sung called for his secretary. A pair of feet that had been lingering outside of the dressing-room door during our conversation moved, and William Kim politely entered. He bowed to everyone in the room. Everything is ready for us to depart to the hotel, sir, he said. Kang Sung nodded and then introduced William to Alexis. This is my secretary. He will be arranging the paperwork and any future meetings and business appointments that I have usually go through him. William instantly offered his business card to Alexis. Alexis nodded as he tucked it into the inside pocket of his blazer. I will make sure my people arrange things through him. Brilliant. We will be in Vienna for 2 more weeks. Perhaps before we go we can have all the details of this engagement ironed out, and even allow the 2 children to meet. With that, there were a few more pleasant words of goodbye, and then we all parted ways. Kang Sung was quiet throughout our journey to the car and our short drive to the hotel. It was only when Min Ho was about to take me to my own room that Kang Sung stopped me and said, I don't care what you do to this girl or how you do it, but remember that she is to be your wife and also remember your position in our family. Whatever you do, it must never be made public, and you must keep her on your side. I quietly glared at Kang Sung, my dark eyes reflecting his serious gaze. I felt like protesting a bit, but then I realized that would be childish. He had a point. I simply nodded and then tugged on Min Ho's hand, and we went off to my room. As Min Ho tucked me into my silk sheets, he showed me the phone. Chahuna had barely made a dent into all that talc. She had thrown up a copious amount of times, and tears were rolling down her cheeks, leaving wet trails between all the powder. There were parts underneath her where the powder had even turned brown and yellow as she pissed herself and excreted. A symptom of consuming talc was diarrhea. Watching her struggle made my face twitch and the corners of my lips curl. I sniggered. I could only imagine how much her chest hurt. All those fibers and particles filling her lungs and the exposure of some asbestos pieces was surely slowly killing her and causing a lot of discomforts. I watched her cry and puke more before leaving her a sweet bedtime message. Don't stop, keep going. I'm watching you always. Chapter 36. Anastasia 1. When I was most active as a serial killer in my past life, I only chose 2 types of victims. The first type was people I found somewhat disgusting, dull, irritating, or rude. People that I wanted to take my time torturing. The second type were the ones I wanted to eat. They purely satisfied my hunger and my carnal desire for violence. These people were usually very attractive. Something about them just looked delicious. Either they were physically fit, or they had a unique quality to them that attracted me. Anastasia fit into both of those types. From the moment she stared at me with those haughty and belittling eyes, I wanted to peel the skin off of her flesh like an orange, scalp her and beat her for days in my torture room. But there was something beautiful and timeless about her. She looked like a doll. Her large green eyes were clear and gleamed like glass. Her skin appeared silky smooth like porcelain and slightly bouncy. I wanted to touch her cheeks. I wanted to bite into them and feel the soft meat wrapping around my molars. Her skin was so pale that I could make out her veins, beating blue through it. I wondered what her blood tasted like. Was she bitter or sweet? I wanted to take my time cooking her, taking her apart piece by piece and using her in a new dish each time. I wanted to make a crown out of her perfect pearly teeth and a bracelet from her smooth nails. My lips felt dry and I licked them as I continued to look at her. She noticed the movement of my mouth and my hungry gaze, and she shot me a repulsed look as if to say, "You." 3 hours earlier. It had been a week and a few days since Kang Sung and Alexis had that talk. I wasn't there for any of their subsequent meetings, but they had smoothly arranged everything. That morning, news of our engagement was already being circulated. Min-ho had even shown me an article about our union at breakfast. Before I had even finished my morning meal, Kang Sung came into my hotel room with his secretary and a large entourage of stylists. I was then put into a double-breasted custom-made Alexander McQueen suit from their latest collection. My hair was given slight curls, and they even put blush on my nose and rouge on my lips. The stylist squealed, "Oh my God, he's such a little angel, just look at him. He's too beautiful, such a little cherub." Before I could ask anyone what this was all about, I was taken to a car and driven to the Romanovs' Vienna estate. Despite their claims that they were losing money and facing bankruptcy, the Romanovs lived lavishly, well, at least on the outside. Their estate matched the size of the one that belonged to my Kang family. In fact, it seemed like they had even more land than us. Of course, once we entered, we could see the signs of poverty. The estate was made up of buildings that were a few hundred years old and needed constant maintenance. While we walked through the halls of their main house, I noticed that certain wings simply had out-of-order signs due to broken floors or structures that they didn't have the money to repair. There were markings on walls where old furnishings used to be, which they had likely sold off. There was also a small amount of staff. For an estate this big, I expected at the very least to see 10 to 30 workers per building, but I barely saw 4 as we were taken to their large sitting room. The main figures of the current Romanov family were there to welcome us. There was Grand Duchess Anna and her husband Prince Alexis, their 2 teenage sons Prince Boris and Prince Michael, and their grandfather Duke Panteleimon Romanov of Russia. Other members of the House of Romanov didn't seem to be present, likely because they didn't respect this arrangement and didn't want to give the Kang family and me any face. This was understandable. We weren't from any noble royal lineage. Some probably found the whole arrangement to be degrading for them. Prince Michael's eyes shone once we entered the room, and he saw me. "Amazing! I thought the photos were edited, but you really are that adorable. You're like a painting," he gasped. Alexis coughed. "Michael, your manners." "Oh." Michael blushed with embarrassment, and then politely went up to me and kneeled to reach my height. He said in English, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ho. I'm Prince Michael, the eldest son of Grand Duchess Anna of Russia and Prince Alexis." I politely nodded and shook his outstretched hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Ho Kang from the Kang family of the Kangmung group." I used Russian to say this, and when the Romanov family heard me, their eyes lit up and they made small gasps and sounds of approval. "Wow, you speak like a native. You're as impressive as all the rumors claim." Michael smiled with pleasure and then proceeded to politely greet Kang Seung. Once everyone had said hello to each other and sat down and were served some beverages, Seung raised a steady eyebrow. "Where is Anastasia?" Alexis smiled awkwardly. "She'll be coming in a moment. She's just taking her time to get dressed this morning." "I see." Kang Seung gave an understanding smile as he sipped his tea. It was clear that the child was likely putting up a fuss about the whole thing, and her maids were struggling. "Anastasia is a very strong-willed young madam," the Grand Duchess said. Her voice was clear and smooth. "The Duchess was a very beautiful and elegant woman. Every move she made was poised and proper. I couldn't help but stare at her." She continued, "Anastasia likes to have her way, and she throws a lot of tantrums. It's my fault for spoiling her. After my older brother and his wife died in a car accident, I wanted to do everything for Anastasia so that she could live in comfort and luxury, and not be reminded of her parents' absence. But that makes her think that she can do anything she likes, so unfortunately she is quite opposed to this marriage. I apologize for her attitude in advance." "Why apologize to these commoners?" a loud voice announced from the doorway. That's when I turned and I saw Princess Anastasia for the first time. Chapter 37. Anastasia 2. "Why apologize to these commoners?" Anastasia's haughty yell immediately caused the Grand Duchess's regal expression to freeze. A frown appeared on her clear face like a storm in summer. "Anastasia, watch your words," she warned. "Why should I watch my words, Auntie? I didn't say anything wrong. They are commoners. My great-grandmother was Princess Anastasia herself, the daughter of the last Tsar of Russia. I have the same namesake as the Tsarina. Anastasia Romanova and I have the same blood as the first Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Our family ruled Russia for centuries. What have they ruled? Nothing. I hear they're businessmen, so the word commoner is fitting. Or should I have said, peasants? I could see rage gleam in the Grand Duchess's eyes. She looked like she was about to stand up and slap the living daylights out of her niece, but she quickly calmed herself down. She remained extremely stoic and poised. She didn't yell, in fact, her voice became so low that she was almost whispering. With a tone colder than Arctic frost, she said, "Anastasia, do you really want to disrespect me like this? Are you really going to shame our family in front of our guests?" Anastasia saw the icy look on her aunt's face, and the young girl's rosy cheeks paled. "That's not the case, Auntie. No buts, no ifs, no excuses. If I wanted a dog that barked, I would have raised one." Her tone was so chilly that even I felt a tad cold. The Grand Duchess's eyes were like daggers, even though her expression remained unchanged. I could feel her anger, and it wasn't even directed towards me. Her glare made the rowdy young girl immediately quiet down. Anastasia had never been on the receiving end of the Duchess's anger before. She was used to throwing tantrums and then getting anything she demanded. She assumed the Duchess would treat her the same way, even in this situation, but she was obviously mistaken. Considering her upbringing, you'd think she'd be smarter than this, but she clearly wasn't that bright. She stood quietly in the frame of the door, and her eyes became wet as she held back tears. "Now, apologize for your lateness. Sit down and greet your fiancé." Anastasia made a face, the kind of face that expressed that she was deeply unwilling, but under the sharp gaze of the Grand Duchess she obeyed the command. She brusquely apologized for being late, and sat opposite me with a deep pout on her lips. "Zdraste," she said. The Grand Duchess frowned deeper when she heard Anastasia's words. Zdraste meant hello, but it was the most informal form of the greeting. Usually, Zdraste was reserved for those closest to you. Otherwise, it was offensive, considered lazy, and most definitely rude. 1. The Grand Duchess shot her a warning look, but she didn't say anything. I could just tell that she was inwardly sighing. I greeted Anastasia back with a more polite "Здравствуйте," my greeting only fetching me a callous sneer in return. Something about her expression made my blood boil a bit. It was so necessarily haughty. A child like her, who had barely experienced the world and the people in it, was capable of making such a face, as if she truly believed she was superior to all those around her. She was clearly just an immature child, but I couldn't ignore how annoying she was. I physically had to clasp my hands tightly together under the table and fight the urge to grab the fork in front of me and stab them into her eyes. I wanted to pluck them out and then reach deep into her skull and scoop up that egotistical brain of hers. I could almost hear her cries of pain and agony, but it was simply a fantasy. I controlled my breathing a bit, but the desire to attack her was still strong. I really needed to work on my self-control. Ever since I'd been reborn as Kang Ho, I had become more impulsive than I used to be. There were so many people I was itching to kill. I never used to be so impatient. Was it because I was young? If I didn't learn to control myself soon, I would probably kill her before we ever got married. But that would be foolish. As much as I desired to murder Anastasia, she would be my wife. I had learned from personal experience that killing people close to you is dumb. In my youth as Daniel Slade, I killed quite a few people that I was close to, Father Johnson being just one of them. I wasn't good at covering my tracks in my early days. When people disappeared and I left behind evidence, I only got away with it through sheer luck. That luck was partly due to the stupidity of the investigators and partly because of the times. When I started my journey, it was the late 1950s. Technology hadn't been advanced then. Fingerprints weren't a thing, a lot of police were quite helpless, and my good reputation stopped me from being a suspect. And sometimes petty criminals would claim my murders as their own just to boost their reputation. Either way, I would often manage to just about slink by from getting caught. But I was often questioned, and I hated the attention that came with it. I just wanted to be able to enjoy my hobbies in peace like most people. So I learned to be more cautious, and I made it a rule to not kill people I knew. I think everyone should learn not to mix private pleasure with public life. Even with Melody, I didn't start really torturing her until we had gotten married and moved from the city to a remote village together. She didn't know my true nature until it was too late to run. I wanted to be this patient with Anastasia, but I also wanted to rip her apart in an instant. In this life, I was finding it harder and harder to stick by my own rules. But then again, this is a new life. I should be allowed to mess around a bit. I looked up and noticed that Anastasia was continuing to glare at me, her arms crossed and her nicely shaped blonde eyebrows wiggling at me in a mocking way. Her attempts to provoke me were juvenile. I didn't respond to her taunts. It would put me on the same level as her. I simply took some bread from the large servings of food in front of us, broke off a piece, dipped it into salt, and ate it slowly. As I continued to ignore her, I noticed how increasingly angry she was getting. The way her small face turned red with anger was quite amusing. While I couldn't play with her for now, I would definitely have fun annoying her in small ways. Maybe I would even get close to her, treat her caringly and with love, so that she would be even more betrayed and distraught when I begin to destroy her in the future. Just the thought made me smile. In Russia, dear guests are traditionally welcomed with bread and salt. The guest should break off a piece of bread, dip it in salt and eat. It is a symbol of communion and shows that the guest has become a friend. Treating the guest with bread and salt means you're establishing a relationship of love and trust among guests and hosts, whereas the refusal to taste bread and salt is regarded as an insult. It is not without reason that they say, even the Tsar does not refuse from bread and salt.